German cockpit Victor en Pushback gewoon discussion qualificatie. So.
Got on Pushback group. Lock brakes are released.
I guess I better explain what's going on here before I get a call from the FAA or one of my bosses. In the US, we have rules that are governed to us by the FAA. They determine what we can and cannot do. From there, the airline can make bigger or more stringent restrictions based on what the FAA allows us to do. So the FAA does not allow us to do filming or take photos or do anything during the critical phases of flight. So taxi, takeoff, landing, those would be some examples of critical phases of flight where if you make a mistake, it's very, very important that you be paying all your attention to what's going on and be moving your $300 million plane instead of doing something like walking with a camera in front of your face. Now, do I personally think mounting a camera on a window that is no one's touching it or no one's being involved in it before you get into the critical phases of flight is a safety risk? No, but I'm just a monkey that pushes buttons in a plane. No one really cares what I think. However, those are the rules, and I'm just in the FAA sandbox here, so I gotta color within the lines, otherwise they're gonna take away my wings. So I can't make this video, but I saw it and I thought, you know what, I've never been able to explain what's going on here, and a lot of people have seen this video and they probably don't know what's going on here. So I thought this is a perfect chance because this is coming out of Miami, where as a lot of you know, I used to be based. One of these days I might get based there again if I get lucky, but so it's coming out of a base that I know on a runway that we take off from all the time, runway 9, and it's in a 747-400. So I can explain to you all the little intricacies that I've never been able to explain to you without getting in any trouble from the FAA, which is great. All that's happening here is there was a call that was made from the guy sitting in the right seat, and he was calling for permission to push. And then you can see the guy here actually sitting in the left seat, which is what's over his left-hand shoulder there. You can see him talking to a guy on the ground. That guy's hooked up to a tug, and what he's doing is confirming that the tug is hooked up, and then they're going to release the parking brake. And that's this little movement that you see him making here. You kind of have to press back into your seat, and that's what you use to release the parking brake. So if you were ever part of a 747 crew or will never be part of a 747 crew, this is exactly, everything you're going to see here is exactly what it looks like in real life. I'm just going to explain to you what's going on, things that you would never really notice or see before. But that guy is, when he gets that permission, that guy that's on the ground can obviously see behind the plane, and he hooks up the tug and he lets us know, hey, we're hooked up, and we get, okay, great. So then they'll ask us to release the parking brake, so that way they now have control of the plane going forward or backward or whichever direction they want. They need to get that confirmation that the brakes are released. So that's what's happening, and that's what that rock was back in his seat. Later, you're gonna see some things that they do different than how we do it.
All right, that's good. You give me a call when we can start again. Cancel the ICAS.
Yeah, sorry.
Next.
It's funny because I make that exact same call all the time. The captain was calling down and saying, hey, let us know when we can start.
All right, that's good. You give me a call when we can start again.
Because you have full engine, it can take a while to get them all started up and going. And at this point, you're in the plane, everything, all the people or everything's loaded up, and you're ready to just get the show on the road. So he calls down and says, hey, let us know when we're good to start. Those tug drivers can see obviously behind the plane and where you can and cannot start your engines. They also have to be pushing that plane back. So if you start your engines right there, even at idle, it's so much forward pressure that depending on the type of tug they're in, they can't push you back. Some tugs can do it. They can push back on all 4 engines running if you want to, but some tugs don't have that power. And sometimes there's something or someone behind the plane, so you can't do it. So even though it's our plane, you have to ask for, they have to give you the permission. And a lot of times if you're in a hurry, which I usually am in a hurry at this stage, like I want to get it going, I say, hey, let us know when we're good to start. Just as a reminder, like as a way of saying, like, I want to start the engine now because as soon as you disconnect, like I want to be on my way. So it's just kind of funny that they do that. The other thing that you heard him say is go ahead and cancel the ICAS.
Cancel the ICAS.
Yeah, sorry.
Next.
That's a screen here, and it shows you all the different messages that can show up and potentially if there's a problem. So we have a habit of wanting to keep that clear. That way if something does show up, it grabs our attention. So it's kind of a good way, a good habit to be in. You want to always have that thing clear and never anything up there.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Car 450.
First, I sped that up because it's super slow in real life, and then watching on a video feels like watching paint dry. But right here, the pilot is actually talking to the truck driver and getting the permission to start the engines. The pilot in the right seat then pulls these two knobs, and that gets the engines turning. But without throwing these levers here, no fuel is actually injected into the engines to actually kick the engines up to have them running on their own. So it's a two-step process, two different people. But the other thing that's a little bit strange is that maybe that's their airline policy. It's not how we do it. They do engine in 3 and 4 together. Every airline that I've ever seen, and for systems logic, every pilot is going to start engine 4 always. How we do it, we do 1 and 4. There's some systems reasons why I think we do it. I think it's a smarter system as well to have symmetrical thrust on one on each engine instead of 2 on one and none on the other. But they choose to start engines 3 and 4 at the same time. But every airline, I would imagine, would always start 4, whether it be 4 and 1 or 3 and 4. We just do 1 and 4, or 4 and 1, technically.
Start 2 and 1. Cancel idle first.
You hear that little meep meep noise that they made? It was in the first other clip earlier, but listen to this noise that you hear. That's one of the pilots adjusting their seat, and it is super common. Every pilot, almost every pilot I see does it, because you get in your seat, you get situated while you're there, while you're loading the box and you're doing everything, and then as you start to get kind of comfortable, you want your seat to be in the exact same position. There's some training involved to get exactly where you want it, and those little adjustments are adjustments forward and adjustments up and down, and you can do like little tiny micro corrections. So you get in and you get 98% of your seat where you want it to be, and then you start making these micro corrections. And so that's what these meep, 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 meep. And the first 2 seats are the only 2 that make that noise. But it's a really common sound that you'll hear as the plane's getting ready for like taxi and pushback. Once you get rolling, it doesn't happen so much. And then on landing, you'll see it as well on landing. Like usually the last few minutes of a flight as I'm getting ready to land, I just kind of get comfortable and get exactly where I want to be, because you're normally pushed back, or at least I am. I'm pushed back all the way. You're getting in and out of your seat all the time. Someone else has sat in that seat. They've moved the seat up or down. So you start making little micro adjustments as you get ready to land as well, and it makes that little meep meep noise. So the other thing that's pretty interesting is you'll see some pilots do this is this little sticky note here, I'm guessing is their flight number. Every pilot has their own system. I write mine. If you've seen those vlogs, I'll write it at the top of this piece of paper. I always write it in the same spot every time, so my brain doesn't have to think about looking where I need to go. If I need to say a call sign in an emergency, my brain has been looking at the same spot for years, so I know exactly where to look. Now for him, it's to make a sticky note and put it there. I don't want to fly around with a sticky pad, and I don't want to buy sticky pads, so I don't do that. I just put it on a sheet of paper that I already use. It's like a printed out piece of paper from another flight or something like that. I'll use that and I'll write all that information, and then I stick it here in my breast pocket when I leave the flight. And then the next day when I'm doing the next flight, I pull that piece of paper out and write all the notes that I need for that next going flight. And that's my system. His system is sticky notes.
Right, sir. Contracts are set, confirm the pin is out, you made it. Thanks, bye.
There's a lot going on here, but first, did you hear those two little cracks right at the beginning of the video? Those noises were actually the starter cutout going back into their position. So those two little things that the guy pulled earlier, after the engine starts picking up and it's now running on its own, those two little knobs that he pulled pop back into place. And then after that, he starts his flow, meaning it's the things that we do by memory before we check them. So it's a flow, so you do a bunch of different steps, and then you go back with a checklist to verify all those things that needed to be touched and done are done correctly and are where they're supposed to be. He turns off the APU, which is a little engine in the back that we use to start up the engines and keep the plane cool and things like that. Then he takes all the hydraulics, there's 4 different ones, and he puts them all onto auto. He checks this center area to see if he missed anything, which is fine, but there's usually typically nothing that we're changing at this phase of the flight. Then he turns on the air conditioning systems for the plane, which is what we use to heat and cool the plane, and we have 3 of those. Those are known as packs. And then he hits a little button here, which is turning on the aft cargo heat, which is a strange little button that you're required to turn on for every flight and turn it off for a few specific situations, but a button that you must turn on and then must also turn off for just about every single flight. It's funny, they took it away on the Dash 8 because it was one of those things like, well, you have to always turn it on and always turn it off. So if you have to always do those 2 things, why don't you just take that button away? Which is what they did on the later model, the Dash 8, the latest version of the 7.4. And then you see the captain here talking to the tug driver again. This is the last time we're actually verbally communicate to them. And that's where you see him set the brake, and the tug driver isn't going to be actually communicating verbally, but he just wanted to ensure that everything was disconnected, and then he'll visually show you the pin, and you'll see the tug drive away, and you'll verify, and they'll give you a salute or a wave off, and then they expect you to acknowledge them. So you'll wave or salute or whatever you want to do. You've seen in the military, they do a salute. Some guys wave, some guys salute. It's different every time, but there's an acknowledgement that's now that's a visual. Hey, I see you. I see that you have the pin. Sometimes at night they'll have a light and they'll hold it up with a flashlight so you can see it. It's something that they use as part of the pushback procedure. So, but you need that gone, because if that pin is stuck in there, your gear won't go up, and then you have to come back in and land. And let's say on a 747, you got to dump a ton of fuel before you can come back in and land. It's a real mess, and nobody wants to be in that situation. So it's very important that they pull that pin out, and you want to verify that they pull it. They want to show it to you. It's just kind of what happens at this stage, and it's their responsibility to take it, but at the end of the day, it's a pilot's responsibility to verify that it got taken. That makes sense.
Makes sense.
Before taxi, NTI set, recall checked, auto brakes, RTO, flight controls checked. Ground equipment,
Clear left.
clear right, right,
Alright, pixie lights on, please. Right. Okay.
So now that the engines are started and they've walked away, now the pilots start to do all their flight control checks. You saw the pilot looking down at the screen here. He's verifying that all the controls actually feel good, but he's looking at these indications on the screen. These little triangles are verifying that you have full range of control, and it's matching what you're actually feeling as you're turning the control handles here. Now, if I was making a Microsoft Flight Sim or a flight game of planes, I would make all those noises part of the experience, because when me as a pilot is watching this, this is exactly the noises and all the little humming noises that you hear and the little beep beep adjustments that you hear. These are all part of the experience. If you were to ever sit on a flight deck of a 747, because you were a flight attendant or you were a crew member or you were jump seating and you were riding up there. Everything that you're seeing right now is exactly what it would be like. So it's kind of cool. And I know the only people that are gonna watch this are gonna be like super aviation nerds, because that's the only people that would find this interesting. But so far, this is exactly what it's like. Now, they're in Miami, and I think they're coming out of the Western U, which is typically where we park. And when we come out of there, it's a pretty quick taxi. It's unlike, let's say, somewhere in China, for example. You could get there and it could be an hour plus taxi to get to the other side of the airport before you take off. Why the other side of the airport? I don't know, but it's their airport, it's their rules, so that's the way it goes. And it's kind of like being in pilot jail, because you're stuck in the seat, nobody can get up, you can't get up and get snacks, you can't do anything. Everyone's got to sit there and play the game until you get to the other side of the airport and blast off. So that's where they're at. However, in Miami, it's probably 5 to 7 minutes from this point to actually take off, so it's pretty nice.
48. Right. Ready to recap? In LF, correct, working pay for like 5,000. Engine house having selected, track 1570. V4 take.
Text, flaps.
Done.
Here, takeoff in notified. For takeoff checks completed.
Did you notice how far the nose was going over the line? Like, it looks like they were gonna go off the taxiway and into the grass. This is actually normal, but it takes some getting used to, because the nose is actually so much further back than where you're sitting on the flight deck. So there's a lot of times the nose of your plane is actually over in the grass, but that's how far you need to do it in order to get the tire to be where you need it to be. If you don't do that, and let's say you're used to flying a normal plane, let's say a CRJ or an ERJ or a regional jet or a lot of smaller narrow body planes, your nose is kind of underneath you. So you're used to kind of like using that as your judgment. However, if you do that on this plane, a lot of times you'll cut the corner short and you'll run over a bunch of lights or run your tires into the mud or things like that, and that's never a good phone call to have. And then them sitting here and watching these planes go by is so strange for me. I don't know why, but I've sat there in that seat and watched these planes come in and land on that runway hundreds of times. Anyway, so far this is exactly what you would experience if you were ever sit up there. It's exactly it. All the noises, the captain had made like a quick departure briefing. He'll basically say like, hey, this is a recap, everything we talked about 10 minutes ago. This heading up to this altitude, blah, 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 blah. And you'll recap some of the highlighted features that are important. Some airlines will do that. Some airlines will say like, no changes, meaning we didn't change anything from what we talked about while we were at the gate, because you would have already covered this stuff. So different airlines will do different things, but you'll do a little recap there, and then you'll be ready to go. You'll get your before takeoff checklist done. You'll hold short there, and then you come to the fun part.
Sure, line up the way, line.
209, share identified. One close out.
39er is checked. Heading 105, runway 9er. Takeoff, 60.
We select 105. Eigenlijk even parts eraan. Takeoff.
So it looks like their clearance, which is kind of normal out of Miami, they got a clearance of heading 105. So you're not doing the normal takeoff departure that you would do off of that runway. So he has them pre-selected, meaning once they get up to, again, different airlines, so let's say 400 feet, they'll hit the heading select button and then they'll start flying that heading instead of flying down the middle of the runway or flying their original departure procedure, which they were given while they were sitting at the gate there. So they get that all situated. Now, this captain, I'm going to guess, used to fly the classics. And that is because he does something that every classic captain pilot I see do the exact same thing. Let's say classic captain. There used to be a previous version of the 747 of this known as the classic. The 747-100, 200, 300, we refer to as the classic. And what happens is when you fly, some of you will end up being too young to get a chance to fly with some of these guys, but when these older captains will say, back on the classic, and they will tell you this long story about, back on the classic, we used to do it this way, and they'll tell you this long story about this thing that they would do. And one of the things that they would do, back on the classic, is they would set their clocks. Over there by his left hand, what he's reaching over is resetting a clock. And what that does is it sets a timer. That timer lets you know how long you've been in flight. Because at that time, they didn't have what we have now on the 747-400 and the Dash 8, which is this right here. So you see him reach over and hit this switch right here. That actually gets the clock going. And this is what it looks like when you reset the clock. However, right here, you can see on the center pedestal, we have this, which actually gives you the exact flight time that you've been in the air. So it's an old habit that these guys have, resetting the clock, but you don't need it because right here, it shows you the exact flight time that you have. So back when I was a newer pilot on the 747, I would see guys do that. And he goes, all right, reset your clock. And I'm new, I've been here for like 3 weeks. I'm like, okay, set the clock, you know. What do I know? I'm just like kind of holding on to the plane and off we go. And I'm just like shutting up and coloring as this is all going on so I can learn stuff from these guys. And then after the second or third guy did it, I asked like, why are you setting that clock over there? They're like, lets us know how long we've been in flight. And I'm like, yeah, but it says it right here in this box, it says it. He looked at me in a certain type of way that let me know that I'm an idiot. Even though it is exactly true and that makes no sense to do that, I just stopped saying it. They want to reset their clock, it's their clock. They can do whatever they want to it, and that's kind of how I treated it from that point forward. I have a clock here, they want to hit that clock. They're not making me reset the clock, it's just their habit of doing it. And so that's the rhythm and routine. As a pilot, it's really good to have that rhythm of routine of doing the same things again and again, and that keeps you from making a mistake or missing something that's really important. And them setting that clock is one of those things, so I just stopped saying anything about it. But anyways, I'm guessing this guy was a classic captain. I don't know, I'll never know. So I'm guessing all airlines do this. This is pretty much how I do it. He pushes the power up, and then he makes sure all the engine indications are stable, which is usually about 70% of the N1. And then he hits this button on the top. And what that does is it gives power to the auto throttles to actually take over. And then you see them advance on their own. Now, on a lot of planes, it makes this kind of whining noise as it advances them. You can't really hear it here, maybe because the audio isn't so great. If the FAA ever gives me permission, I'll get some really clear audio for everybody. But for now, we're gonna have to listen to this. But it makes a little bit of a whining noise. I have had it where every pilot is different. Some guys like their flight deck kind of blacked out, and this guy had it very dark. And so you couldn't really, I was sitting in the third or the fourth seat. So right now you're watching everything from the third seat. One seat over to the left is kind of where you were looking over that guy's shoulder. That would be what your view is like when you're sitting in the fourth seat. You're looking over the captain's shoulder, basically. So I was sitting in the third or the fourth seat, I don't remember, but I heard the throttle go up, and then I heard click, that noise that you heard of hitting that auto throttle, nothing. And then I hear click again, nothing. And I go, because he had that pedestal, that center thing where the auto throttle switches, he had it turned off. And I go, I just guess. I go, auto throttle's off. I was just a guess because I couldn't see it. And I hear the click, click again. So he clicked it up, turned the auto throttle on, click, and then the auto throttle's picked up and off we went. Anyway, so normally if you hit that click and it doesn't make that noise, your auto throttles are off. Anyways, I heard the click, I knew what was going on, and I thought, I just took a guess that the auto throttles were off. They were. Click, we get up in the air, he's like, how did you know that? I was like, what else could it have been? Because he was gonna, I think, make the guys manually do it, which you can do. You can take off without the auto throttle, it just adds a bunch of extra work. So anyways, there's a little noise that you normally hear in the real plane that you don't really hear in this, but so far it's exactly like what we would do it. That's an 80 knot speed check call. What they're doing is just verifying that both people have indication of the airspeed that's going on. Reason that's important, there have been accidents where, let's say there's something blocking one of the tubes, which is giving the pilots the information for their airspeed. And so you want both people to agree that we're at the same speed. If his says 20 knots and mine says 80 knots, we got a real problem because now the airspeeds aren't in agreement of what's happening. And on the ground, that's an easier problem to fix than up in the air because you start having to guess which one's right, which one's wrong. It can be a problem. So most airlines do a speed check, and usually it's around 80 knots. It's different for different airlines, but that's what they're doing right there. And all these kind of like little rumblings and grumblings that you're hearing, all the motion of all the metal and plastic that's moving is exactly what it sounds like. I know I'm really nerding out here, but if you made it this far in the video, you're loving this experience of what it's actually like to be a pilot on one of these flights. There's a click noise right as the wheels come up. Listen to this little click noise. That noise is the rejected takeoff, the auto throttle button. We have it set on rejected takeoff. That's the mode setting it's on. So there are certain parameters that are in place that if while you're on the takeoff roll, something happens, you're able to reject, and the auto brakes are going to be able to stop you much better than you can stop yourself. Now, once those wheels come off the ground, that thing resets. So once the weight comes off, that rejected takeoff button snaps over into off, and it makes that snap. That's what that snap noise was that button or that knob turning into the off position. I know, super nerd stuff, but it's just funny to me watching this because I get to see it in real life, but I never get to have the comfort of watching it from here. Like when it's happening, I'm working, I can't be like, it would be cool, but I can't film that and then voice it over after the fact. So that's where we're at right now.
Gauge getting split. Parts were never 60. I'd say 17.
Well, I just saved you like 10 years of your life, so you don't have to go to like flight school, work as a flight instructor, go through a few different airlines, and finally make your way up to the 747 so you could sit in that third seat, know everything that's going on as an operating crew member. you basically, if you watch this video and you go and sat in the third seat of a 7.4, you would know everything that was happening, everything that was going on, all the little noises are all exactly what you might expect. And so from this point, they're just going to keep flying. So there's really no value for me to add. I think you kind of saw them do the heading select there. Once I got up in the air, usually it's a few hundred feet before you engage that. And after that, it's kind of like that up till cruise. Then of course, you put your hoodie on and then you stuff your face with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches until you get to your destination 15 hours later and look like you've been run over by a truck. I look forward to hearing from you. Until then, keep the blue side up.